Forget what you know about composition. Now, as a photographer, I'm sure you've heard about the many rules of photography. The rule of thirds, leading lines, using negative space, subframing, the golden ratio, and there's literally a million others out there. Now, all of those are great and wonderful, but what's really exciting about photography is that these can all be visually interpreted into a ton of different ways and vary from photographer to photographer. Composition is easily one of the most important aspects of photography that can make your photos really memorable and incredible, or something that just lacks a storyline. So with all that in mind, I can sit here and go over with you all the technical stuff of photography and like what it really means to use the rule of thirds. But I'm more interested in sharing with you something that feels a little bit more practical and some things that might feel a little more approachable rather than like academic feeling. But truthfully, it's all inspired or like pulls from these rules. I'll be getting all the technical stuff anyway without you even knowing it. And we'll look at some examples together so you can really like see what I'm talking about. So yeah, let's talk composition. Got my tea here with me. I'm drinking white peach tea. What are you drinking? Let me know in the comments. Ugh, hot. All right, so one of the first things that we notice when we look at a photo, and I mean that like first little millisecond, is we notice and like scan if that photo feels balanced. Visually, as like humans, we like when things feel balanced. And when we notice that they aren't, we tend to feel like unsure or like maybe a little bit confused. Generally, I think that's kind of something we want to avoid when we take photos. When you go into taking a photo, ask yourself if there's anything that you're seeing that you're kind of subconsciously dismissing or just kind of glancing over. If there's anything in your composition that you're kind of just visually scanning over or just kind of ignoring, there's a chance that that part of the photo might be either too empty or too overcrowded. In those type of situations, to maintain like a balanced feeling in your photography, it's better to just like crop those out, because even though that might just be a part of your photo, it could be disrupting the overall feel of the photo. Okay, let me grab my tablet and then we can look at some photos together. Girl, why are you always trying to steal the show? Get back there. So let's just like start off with an obvious example of balanced composition. And then we'll move on to something like less obvious. So I think another word that comes to mind when I think of balance is also symmetry. A lot of photographers use symmetry in their photography because it really demands attention to like toward the subject, and it's very eye-catching. This is actually a photo of myself when I was in Korea just a couple months ago. I was so obsessed with the hanbok that I was wearing. Of course, I had to take like a million pictures in it. But okay, just from like initially looking at this photo, I feel like the first thing that I personally notice is like the symmetry. It feels very much like the same on both sides of the photo. But there's like a ton of other like classic rules of photography that are happening in this photo. I think another like clear one to me is leading lines. There's like lines here on the pavement and also like these lines right here that are pointing directly to me, the subject. And then just like generally the photo does feel very balanced. The like negative space of the sky doesn't feel distracting or takes away from the subject. It almost like complements the like grayish tone of the bottom half of the photo. The other thing about like a balanced photo is that it doesn't have to be like totally perfect. I did my best to like compose myself like right in the middle of the shot, but as you can tell, like the door right here, that's like the true center, and I'm just like a little bit like leaning that way. And maybe it's more obvious now that I like pointed it out, but like if you just really like look at the photo, it doesn't feel off balance. I feel like it's just like a really well symmetrical balanced photo. But balance doesn't always have to be as obvious as like symmetry. You can also interpret balance as like visual pull or like visual weight across the entire photo. You can ask yourself like, does this photo feel proportionate? Here's an example. Oh, I still love this photo. I was very excited and inspired by the like sunlight that was pouring into this room. The idea was I wanted Tavia, my subject here, to look like she was a florist and she was just working away on a warm afternoon. Very cute, right? The concept itself was a lot of fun to shoot, and I'm pretty happy with this shot, but I do have to critique my own photo. I purchased like all the greenery that's going on here because I really wanted to look like realistic, but actually the greenery that's like all across the floor right here just feels a little bit too messy. The stems just kind of blend into the floor. By like placing everything on the ground, I was hoping it would feel very candid. What actually ended up happening was this kind of drowns out the lilies as well, which is like a main element of the photo. Additionally, I feel like I could have moved the lilies like slightly this way because it's kind of like right in front of my subject, and that just kind of further drowns out the like entire bottom half of the photo. Because it feels messy, it feels hard to kind of decipher quickly. In that millisecond, you can't really tell what's happening like on the bottom half of this photo, and because of that, the entire photo just feels unbalanced. I feel like this photo would have been a lot stronger if I just got rid of all the greenery down here, especially because there's already a lot of texture going on the ground with like the sunlight, like the window light that's happening right here. Do you see that? Like, oh, right here. Like that could have added a lot of like really nice fun texture to the photo, but I just added like way too many elements. Again, I still love this photo. It was a lot of fun to put together and to capture, but it could have been stronger if I was a little bit more intentional with the placement of all the stems and everything. Just to show you like a quick example, I feel like this photo even is a stronger image than the last one. It's much more simple. It's much more punched in and it highlights the subject very well. And with like her outfit and like the flowers, it really like just portrays that she's like a florist. Not too busy, not too messy, much more balanced. Here's another photo. Remember what I said about like that first millisecond? When I first see this photo, there's this instant feeling of balance. Nothing is competing for attention. Everything you look at complements each other and your eye doesn't like feel stuck in one part of the photo. It just feels very like well balanced, very proportionate. There's this like element of subframing here with the blue like in front of the red rock. It just also feels very satisfying. And once you look at the photo a little more, you notice like details that like enhance the photo. Like there's this subtle leading line that's like right here with the red rock that like kind of slopes downward. Just like works perfectly with like the height of the two models. I remember having to do a little bit of Photoshop with this photo because the like subframing wasn't like perfectly angled right here. And then like realistically the blue cardboard cutout was more realistically like this size. So I just like expanded the blue like upward and downward here. And then I made sure that like the subjects and like this like red rock square was like perfectly centered in the photo. If you think about like this photo versus like the last photo that was like a little bit too busy, you can really tell that this one, there's just like a lot of very simple basic elements. Generally like the feeling doesn't feel crowded or like there's just too much going on. Okay, so moving on from balance, there's another aspect that I guess you could call leading lines, but I feel like it's more helpful to call it like eye tracing or eye flow, or where the photo can like lead your eye, or like how your eyes go through an image. I can't think of a really graceful way to word this right now, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. Hopefully I've like figured it out and titled it really nicely in editing. So again, let's start with something that feels very like obvious to me about like eye flow, or whatever we want to call it. Let's use this photo. Another one of my favorites. I'm just so obsessed with this shot. I just feel like if you look at a photo and it just like feels satisfying, like composition wise, it's like probably a good photo. So how I got this shot was I strategically and maybe made the gross decision to lay down on the downtown ground because I wanted to use this really tall building to use as a way to frame my subject, Marin. You can see how I got that shot by like framing her this way. And then like additionally, there's a lot of like leading lines that are happening with like the building, and then the dress, the actual like huge gray dress that she was wearing also created like leading lines that guides your eye right toward the subject. All of these things just like complement the subject so well. And there was like a slight little breeze going through her hair. It was just like, chef's kiss. So like talking about like eye flow and how this photo kind of like takes you on a little journey is because of those leading lines. You kind of like start down here, and then with the dress and like the building, your eyes just kind of get like led upwards. And that's like really the core of why leading lines are so powerful in images, is because they kind of like take you on a little journey across the photo to show you like, hey, there's like a lot of interesting elements here. Let's kind of like guide you on where those things are. Personally, when I think about that like millisecond, my eye gets like led upward like this way, and then it kind of hits this like negative space of the sky, and then it goes back downward toward the subject. Do you see what I mean when it like takes you for like a little ride? It just makes your eye go like up and then down. And the thing about like strong composition, in my opinion, is that the photo should make it very clear about where the subject is. It shouldn't be hard for the viewer to like decipher what is the subject. Clearly in this photo, there's a building that is being captured, but you understand as the viewer that like the building is not the subject of the photo, the model is. Because I made the choice to like frame her this way, it's not confusing for you to like think like, oh, is the building the main character here, or is it Marin? And that's the thing about like strong composition. Like regardless of what's in the photo, it should make it very clear about like what is and isn't the subject. So like let's find an example of that. This is the final photo that I sent as a deliverable, but this is actually the cropped version of the original image. So I have two models here, but I used one of them to subframe the other one. I had her place her arm like this and hold onto her like hat, and then I shot through her arm to capture the model in the background. Essentially, I created like a little window, and I used that window to subframe the subject. If I had made the decision to kind of keep the original crop of the photo, like if I was zoomed out a little bit more, it would have made it harder to decipher who is the subject. Would it happen this model or this model? Even though zooming out would have technically added more information to the photo, it actually would make the photo feel messier and make for a weaker composition. Here's another example of like leading lines and eye flow. I love this photo because it really showcases something that I always love to talk about when talking about like photography and composition, and that's like really using your environment to your advantage. Get your environment to work for you, girl. So again, just like the last photo, imagine if this was like zoomed out or like punched out just a little bit more so that like the Ferris wheel was a little bit more visible and obvious in the photo. Potentially could have added to the photo, but I think in this case, it might have been confusing to decipher what the subject is. Is it the Ferris wheel or is it the model? Especially because there's like a lot going on with these like flag things, I think, right here. And then like the Ferris wheel itself is very like there's a lot of details going on. There's just like a lot of competing elements that are like fighting to get into the shot. So making sure that when you compose a photo, you got to really think about like where your eye is like drawn to and like where does it go to in the photo. Another really cool thing about this photo is that I love these poles that are like framing her so perfectly. Again, another little thought exercise. If you just like imagine that these yellow poles weren't here, it might have been a subtle change, but it would have made it more difficult for you as the viewer to decipher like where is the subject. You know, with like thinking about like that first millisecond, it probably would have taken you like 5 milliseconds to decipher like, oh, there's the model. But because I was using the poles to my advantage and making my environment work for me, it frames her really beautifully in the photo, and it just like instantly makes your eye like right toward her. Super fun, loving her outfit. This is why I love photography. You can just like create so much out of like something as simple as yellow poles. But this photo actually is great for another reason, which leads me to my next point, and that is using lighting and color to subframe. I just feel like I don't see a lot of photographers talking about this. So not only are these poles like framing her so beautifully, but the color of the yellow poles and the pink outfit that she's wearing not only creates this like lovely juxtaposition that makes the photo like really eye-catching, but it also visually creates like a lot of balance in the photo. Yeah, did you guess that? We're back to balance now. It all just comes together. It all like works together. Like if these poles were like a gray color, it just wouldn't be like quite as strong. Or even like if they were black, I feel like it would make your eye go toward like her hair because of like her hair color rather than like the outfit itself. So yeah, color plays like a really strong element in like how your photo feels. All right, let's open up this photo. Another one of my favorites. What can I say? I like my own photos. So we'll talk about the color in this, but like let's start with the lighting really quick. How does the lighting here create a strong composition? Well, what's really fun is that Christina, the model in this photo, I had her like interact with the sun by like shielding her eyes from the sun. It's like one of my favorite go-to poses. I love it. But because her hand is like placed right here, it kind of leads your eye upward toward the sun. And then the sun rays right here like lead your eyes back downward toward the subject. So pretty. But in terms of like how the lighting is like supporting the composition of the photo, I feel like the strongest part is like the backlit nature of the photo and how it just creates this like golden halo around my model. It just like perfectly highlights the subject in such a dreamy way. You can see how it just like highlights like the flowers like all across here too. It's just like so pretty. And then like shifting over to color, there's so much color happening in this photo, right? The two main colors in this photo are blue and yellow. Two colors that are like almost opposing colors on like the color wheel. How many times can I say color? The blue dress of the subject like matches really nicely with like the blue sky, thus giving you this like really nice cohesive feel. Now I know there is like one color here that is like a little bit off from like the rest of the palette, and that's her like bright red fire truck hair. Truthfully, we were both like a little bit worried that the red hair would just like take away or be distracting in the photos. But once she like put on the dress and like we walked into like the flower field, I actually think it kind of complements the overall feel of the photos really nicely. It just feels like a little bit unexpected and like fun, you know? Ayo, editing study here. I just noticed that the colors in these photos work so well together because the colors are triadic. Red, yellow, and blue naturally work well together according to color theory. Something I definitely didn't intend for during the shoot, but it just kind of worked out for us. Also, I'm a little sick, so I sound congested. On with the video. You can see in the distance back here like how the sunlight is like lighting up mountains over here, and you can like see the yellow flowers over here. It's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful here in Utah. Let's talk about this one. Oh my god, my hair used to be so shiny. What happened? Here I took this selfie right here in my little home studio. If there's one lighting that I just absolutely adore, it's direct window lighting. When you have direct window lighting, you just are gifted with like gorgeous composition and like leading lines that you don't have to like try too hard to figure out how to use. And you can really compose your photos and like your subject in a really interesting way. I feel like I don't see a lot of photographers utilizing like direct window light in their photos. After this video, you should absolutely go and try it for yourself. But yeah, like back to this photo. Imagine if this like window light was not here. If this was a cloudy day, I feel like it would have taken away so much visual interest. I love the way that this like diamond shape that the window created is being used to like subframe the subject. I also like purposely looked like downward like this way, like look in the same direction of like the angle of the window light. So it just like kind of leads your eye downward. That's the thing about like leading lines is like you can make them really like obvious and clear with like actual lines in your photo, but you can also like create leading lines by like the shape of the subject or like the direction the subject is looking. And that's why I feel like using the term leading lines is helpful, but I just feel like it's more helpful to like think of it as like how your eye moves through the photo, because it's not always like physical lines that do it. Sometimes it's much more subtle elements of your photo that like creates this like journey. But yeah, I love direct sunlight. I don't know why so many photographers are like so averse to it. It just makes for like some really fun photos, and it really stands out like on Instagram or like on in your portfolio. So yeah, like take a moment today to like scan through and kind of like analyze your composition skills. And that's how I realized like that florist photo is not one of my strongest images. It's always good to just kind of review your photos and like really look at them with like a critical eye. Ask yourself, how am I using colors to make my photos stand out? What colors stand out in my portfolio? Do things feel balanced or proportionate, or like they have a good flow to them? How do they make you feel? And of course, how can I improve? Next time you go out on a photo shoot, try to find ways to get like really creative with your composition other than just utilizing the rule of thirds. There's so many creative ways to like capture what's in front of you. You just kind of like figure out how to do it. Speaking of like lighting, I actually use the lighting composition tip that I just talked about in my last video. I guess I should point this way. If you feel like you need more help on how to get like the most out of your photo shoots, I talk about my essential checklist that I always go over with myself before any photo shoot. I love talking about composition. Let's do it again soon. For now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you over in this video.